Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyan Books live streaming event and podcast series. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and I'm really excited to be handing the reins over to our guest host this evening, Tami Simon, who will be interviewing her partner, Julie Kramer. Before we get started, Banyan Books acknowledges that although we have people joining from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyan Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyan's podcast and event series are free, and we welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. You can just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the description below, and we welcome your generous support. Also, towards the end of the conversation today, Tami and Julie will be taking questions from you, our live audience. So go ahead and type those in to the comments field on YouTube in the live chat, and they'll get to as many of those as they can. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Julie M. Kramer, a master shamanic healing practitioner who has spent over 20 years guiding people through transformative workshops and trainings. Julie is the founding instructor of the art and practice of shamanic healing, a 3-year professional training and initiation known for guiding committed students into profound relationships with compassionate spirit allies. Her year-long and multi-year immersive programs, including the Sacred Call of the Healer, are recognized for their rigor, spiritual depth, and transformative impact. Her website is juliekramer.com. And joining as guest host this evening is Julie's partner, Tami Simon, founder and CEO of Sounds True, North America's leading publisher of spoken word spiritual teachings. For 40 years, Tami has grown Sounds True into a groundbreaking platform supporting spiritual transformation around the world. She's also the host of the acclaimed Insights at the Edge podcast, with more than 20 million downloads, and she's the founder of the Sounds True Foundation, which brings spiritual resources to underserved communities. Her website is soundstrue.com. And a very special announcement for those joining today. Julie is offering a $200 Canadian program discount for all audience members, as well as all Banyan Books employees, which is really nice. This can be applied towards her Vancouver workshop, which is starting Friday. So anybody who wants to join her workshop on Friday that starts in Vancouver, and also her upcoming virtual workshop, which is from August 8th to 10th. If you'd like to redeem that $200 discount, that's a really generous offer. You can apply the code, which is Banyan 2025. And just note that it's all capital letters. So that's Banyan 2025. Banyan community, really excited, and join me in welcoming Julie Kramer and Tami Simon.
Ross, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And great to be with you.
Thank you both so much.
Great to be with you, friends. I'm from a distance on the East Coast in a bubble that's a sound room, sort of like very space-like orbital bubble. And Julie, you're in West Vancouver in our home, and here's a chance for us to dialogue and for me really to bring you and your work forward. And I remember how many times we have a joke between us where you'll say to me, you're quite lucky in love. And this is a joke from a line in a movie, and it's true. I feel extraordinarily lucky in love. And here in this moment, I feel grateful to have the chance to share that good luck with all of the listeners of this Banyan broadcast. So here we go. You ready?
I'm ready, and we are equally lucky in love.
All right, so let's get at it. Here we go. One of the ways I can converse with people, and of course I converse with you this way too, is to kind of strip things down, if you will, figure of speech, to try to get to the core, to try to uncover what's really, what's really true. What do you actually really know? And one of the things you've said to me is that one of the things I know unequivocally is that compassionate spirits, guiding, helping spirits are real. They exist, and we can partner with them. So here at the beginning, help everyone who's joining us understand and appreciate how this conviction is so unequivocal for you.
Yes. Well, interestingly, I think my curiosity about helping spirits preceded my conviction about their existence and also my conviction in their helpfulness, because that curiosity led me to want to experience the presence of helping spirits. And yet, despite that pull, if you will, I didn't have any notion as a young person as to what I would experience, the depth of love and care that I would experience in relationship with the helping spirits, and also the depth of wisdom that they would offer me and share with me and share on behalf of others. In other words, in the work that I offer other people, the wisdom the helping spirits have shared with me for clients and students has been immeasurable. It's been immense. And I've based such important life altering decisions on the guidance that I received from the helping spirits. Of course, that's always my choice to make as an autonomous adult. And yet the conviction has grown from their wisdom being reliable, being accurate, being relevant, and being helpful again and again and again, both whenever I reach out to the helping spirits for support, but also when I do so on behalf of others. And I would say our relationship is one poignant example of that, the guidance that I received from my helping spirits upon first meeting Tami many, many moons ago. And I remember it so distinctly. My helping spirit said, if what matters most to you is your spiritual unfolding, then this is the only partner for you. And indeed, that proved to be true.
Okay, now this is not going to be some Tammy Julie love fest. We're going to get into the professional training work that you do. But I want to ask this question because I think a lot of people have a sense. They've maybe even had an experience, maybe even several experiences of connecting with something that they might call a voice of guidance, a guardian angel, something like that. But then various forms of doubt and questioning open. And I know something that I'm working on in my own life. And I realize I've never asked you this, which is how have you come to trust your own authority so thoroughly? Because you do. You trust your own knowing of your partnerships with compassionate helping spirits. Where does that sense of inner authority, do you think, come from? I trust my inner authority.
That is a fascinating question, and one indeed you've never asked me. I think in part it has to do with, again, what I mentioned a moment ago, what has evolved in the fullness of time or in the course of time. My reliance upon the helping spirits has grown, and that's been commensurate with how helpful I have found them to be. But you're right, I've never questioned my own ability to access the guidance from the helping spirits. And I've never worried about there not being someone else in a position of greater authority than me serving as an intermediary between us, because my guidance has always been so helpful and it's proven to be thus again and again. So my conviction is based on evidence. But I think there was early on, even as a young practitioner, I discovered this practice, journeying using natural translates in order to contact helping spirits when I was in my 20s. So I was very unformed. Not everyone is, I suppose, at that age, but I think I was a late bloomer. And for me, the ability to contact helping spirits whose wisdom was so immediate, so available, so obviously valuable and useful became the guiding light in my life. And that's what led me to make the most important decisions that I made about my career, about my choice in a partner, about where I lived, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, what would you say to people who the voice of doubt comes in and they're like, this could just be thinking, fantasy, imagination, a wishfulness that this ancestor is present. Everybody says you can contact an ancestor. Okay, maybe, sorta, kinda.
Yes. Well, I think those are common responses that people have when talking about the possibility of the existence of the helping spirits. And I think those are views that are widely expressed or represented within a collective, perhaps the mainstream or the more conventional aspects of our culture. And I think for me growing up, the existence of the spirit world always felt as real and as normal as the physical world. And for me, a world in which the helping spirits don't exist, or a world in which the spirit world doesn't exist, to me feels so foreign and so abnormal, if you will, so unnatural, if you will. And so part of what I notice is that a lot of people actually feel similarly to me. And then their exposure to conditioning, to consensus reality, to convention, to accepted norms of behavior, social decorum, etc., often persuade them to begin to doubt their experiences and to begin to mistrust, because it's actually incredibly common that people have had important or impactful dreams, visitations, messages from helping spirits. I would say that's highly pervasive in our culture, but then what often follows is a tendency to disregard or to dismiss or to belittle. Somehow that didn't get engendered in me quite as much as I sometimes encounter in others. And yet, what I notice is that even people who present as being quite skeptical or who lead with that by their own admission, who think of themselves as being quite cynical or quite skeptical, they will quickly set that aside if given permission to just consider the possibility that what they've been experiencing is real and reliable. And once given permission to consider that, it's amazing how open-hearted they are to receiving the presence of the helping spirits and the guidance from their helping spirits as well. So in that way, I think it's hard for me to think of myself as being unique, because I so often find people feel similarly when given the opportunity and when given a safe place to talk about their experiences, which is what I try to provide for people, because I'm much less interested in talking about my experiences than I am in helping people begin to have their own, because that's where the conviction grows. And that's, to me, what's most important, is my getting out of someone else's way in order to enable them to have their own direct and immediate experience.
I do think your level of trust and inner authority is high, and in that way is unique, and it's beautiful that you're here creating a permission field for all of us. Okay, now here's a question. You teach people, as you said, using natural trance states, and maybe you can share a bit more about that, what that means. Well, let's start there, and then I'll ask you the second half of my question. Natural trance states? Question mark?
Yes. So the practice that I use and teach, so this is what my own personal practice is predicated upon, and also what my offerings are predicated upon, is teaching the practice of shamanic journeying. So that's a practice for entering into a trance state in the way that I teach it and practice it, using natural means. And so through rattling, drumming, singing, dancing, and whistling, we can naturally alter the brainwave activity. So we can naturally shift our state of consciousness from a beta state to an alpha state to a theta state. And that theta state is a natural, expansive, altered state when we begin to become more able to perceive that which is around us all the time. I would contend the presence of the invisible dimensions of reality, or the other worlds, if you will, or the other spectrums of reality that coexist with ours, and the helping spirits who inhabit those other dimensions of reality. So we can perceive their presence once we're in a natural trance state, which can be very easily achieved through those means.
Right. Now, you're not hooked up to any kind of measuring of brainwaves. How does it feel inside when you're like, oh, I'm in a theta state now? I can tell. I can feel it.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different for everyone. I can say that for myself, it's at once a calm state and yet a wakeful state. And so I would say I'm not drowsy, I'm alert, but I'm also not frenetic or even discursive in terms of my thought patterns. So there's an overall slowness, I would say, and softness and evenness, and at the same time, a wakefulness, because we're trying to remain open and perceptually attuned and aware, while at the same time not being discursive and not being caught up in the usual activity of our minds, but instead entering into a state that allows for the receptivity that's important for us to have in the practice, to be available to the presence of the helping spirits and receptive to their teachings, to their guidance, their wisdom, etc.
Now, one of the words you use is partnering with compassionate
Hmm.
spirits. And
Hmm.
since you're my partner, I'm going to pick up on this because I want to understand more also what you mean by that partnering. As in, yes, we're listening, we're receiving guidance. Are we somehow giving a gift as well and contributing to the flourishing of spiritual beings? Is this a two-way? Is there reciprocity here? What kind of reciprocity?
Hmm. Well, I think one dimension of the reciprocity that exists is that there is a two-way street when it comes to communication. And so for me, the helping spirits have many, sometimes quite inventive ways that they make contact with us, that they interrupt our usual day-to-day thought patterns and sometimes habitual patterns and make themselves known to us. And so that can happen through the dream time, that can happen through signs and synchronicities, that can happen through seeing or hearing messages, etc. And of course, the practice that I'm describing, practice of journeying, is a way that we can initiate contact. So there's a two-way street, and thus a sense of reciprocity when it comes to us being able to contact each other and to be in communication with each other. And part of the value of learning the practice is that we can become very empowered by learning a practice that enables us to establish contact when we choose to, rather than being in a more passive role. And I would say similarly, and in keeping with that, my emphasis on partnership or collaboration has to do with the importance I feel of us taking a posture of maturity and sovereignty in relationship with our helping spirits. So we're not parentifying them and infantilizing ourselves. We're not effectively asking them to tell us what to do. We're consulting them, we're seeking their counsel, and we're receptive to their wisdom. And we're also making choices about the decisions we make using the guidance to varying degrees. I happen to rely a great deal on the guidance that I receive, but that's also because I found it to be so effective, to be so useful, to be so accurate, and to be so helpful. So it's proven itself in the fullness of time. But I don't feel that the helping spirits need anything from me in a reciprocal sense, much like in a human relationship where there is an exchange, there is reciprocity at the human to human level. my experience with the helping spirits differs from that, first of all, in that they're not egoic beings. And so they're not operating in that same way. So we have to consider them not through a human centric lens or an egocentric lens. But I also think there's a way in which these are helping spirits who are volunteering to make their support available to us. And they're very invested, in my experience, in human evolution. And so, if there's any gratification on their part, if you will, although I don't think I would quite language it in that way, but they do seem very committed and dedicated to our unfolding, to our well being, to our sense of wholeness, but also to our spiritual evolution. That's how they're supporting us and helping us. And yet, they hold us with unconditional love and acceptance. And so, we make mistakes. We trip and fall. We cause ourselves and others unintentional or sometimes intentional harm. We don't listen to the guidance sometimes. Those things have all happened to me and others that I work with, and I find the helping spirits to be, speaking of unequivocally, consistent in their support, unconditionally loving and accepting of us wherever we are, even when we feel like we're taking one step back after taking two steps forward.
I imagine people listening to this and saying, okay, I think I might know what Julie means by helping spirits, but I'm not really sure. Are there different categories, different kinds? Can you kind of, if you will, give us, could I go so far as to say a map of what might be happening in the spirit world in terms of the different types of helping spirits that I could potentially partner with?
Yes, certainly. So I think talking about categories may be helpful. So there are certainly helping spirits who are our benevolent ancestors, who are seeking to provide us as their descendants with support and to share their knowledge and wisdom with us, and possibly to serve the specific biological lineages or ancestral lineages that we belong to. And there are helping spirits who have never lived human lifetimes here on planet Earth, and whose presence here, despite their accessibility and availability, is not informed by a human lifetime. And yet, I would say, even in working with ancestral beings, my own ancestors, for example, I'm mindful of ensuring that I don't limit them or pigeonhole them in ways that tie them to the lifetime in which I knew them. Because to me, those are spiritual beings who might have incorporated at a particular time and place, who lived a lifetime in which I may have known them or perhaps only knew of them. But for me, that's just one facet of the diamond of who they are as spiritual beings. And similarly, with other helping spirits that I encounter, some of whom have had human lifetimes, others have not, but they are very multi-dimensional beings in the sense of being faceted, beings. And so even in those instances, let's say with an angelic being who hasn't lived a human life, I still try to consider what else they may be that transcends and includes that particular form, because even if it's not a human form per se or tied to a human lifetime, their consciousness may very well transcend and include my concepts of them, my projections of them. And so these helping spirits who take these different forms sometimes can become limited by us in our perception of them. And one of the ways that we can work with that is to ask them to just drop their forms altogether and to experience them simply as light. And so, whether they may initially appear as perhaps an animal spirit or the spirit of a beloved ancestor or an angelic being, or let's say another religious or spiritual being, perhaps a prophet or a god or goddess or deity, regardless of what form they initially appear in, and they can appear in those many different forms, one practices to experience them in their formless state And then oftentimes what happens is that they invite me or the people that I'm practicing with to drop our forms as well. And that's part of, for me, the emphasis on the partnership, because we too are spiritual beings who happen to be in human bodies at this time. But for us too, that's just one facet of the diamond, of the perhaps unimaginable or unfathomable mystery of who we are as spiritual beings.
Now, you teach, Julie, people how to become professional spiritual healers. And tell me if I have this right or not, that in the way that you teach people to be spiritual healers, a starting point, if you will, is this connection with benevolent helping spirits. That's the beginning. And that it's that relationship, that partnership that informs and is the platform, if you will, for spiritual healing work that you teach people to do. Is that correct? Or how would you explain it in your own way?
Yes, I would say that's absolutely
Well, I'm really
correct.
glad,
That
because we've been living together a really long time. So I was hoping that I had basically had the basic gist of what it is you're doing. So yeah, that's good.
it would be frightening if you didn't, but
Right.
yes,
Okay.
indeed,
Okay.
that is correct. Yes, yes. The premise of the work is predicated upon our relationships with the helping spirits, that partnership that we form, because what we're engaging in is a process for providing spiritual healing, and the healing comes from the helping spirits. And so, yes, we as the practitioners of this particular modality have a role to play, but the diagnosis comes from the helping spirits, and they're the ones, if not providing the healing itself directly, then we as practitioners are facilitating the healing taking place in collaboration with the helping spirits. So it's very much a trifecta, if you will, of the practitioner, the client, and then their combined helping spirits providing spiritual healing support.
Now, you mentioned that compassionate helping spirits are interested, I think is the word, or committed to our spiritual evolution. They're committed to our, and gosh knows we need humans to be evolving dramatically at this time. Do you have any sense that the spiritual world, if you will, is accelerating its contact with humans on Earth at this time in order to help us with our evolution, or what's your view?
Well, I certainly don't feel that I can accurately represent the spirit
Sure.
world in
Well,
its
that's good.
entirety.
I think that's good. That's a good humble moment. Hats off to you. That's good.
Well, what I find interesting is that when someone learns the practice of journeying, and I've now been teaching this practice since 2003, I learned it myself in 2000, so I started teaching quite early on in my own, pardon me, unfolding as a practitioner, because I was so enthusiastic and passionate about everyone learning how to do that practice, because I found it so simple, because it was so accessible, and there were such immediate, valuable, beneficial results. And I continue to feel that way. I still lead introductory workshops because I just love to experience people having contact for the first time. But oftentimes in those situations, it feels like something earth shattering has occurred. And what I remind people of is that helping spirits have been here all along. I don't actually think they're doing anything differently. What's happening is that we're shifting internally. There's a shift in our own awareness or receptivity. So where we're allowing for their presence, we're turning our attention towards them. And the discovery that they're right there is earth shattering, but they're actually not doing anything differently. It's a shift that we're undertaking. And I would say in learning the practice, we're doing so deliberately and intentionally for the purpose of being able to perceive them rather than their presence remaining obscured or murky, and thus perhaps questionable, doubtful, or unreliable. And so I feel the helping spirits have always been with us, continue to be with us, and are available and ready. And if more people are inspired to seek them out, which I feel is happening, then that's wonderful, because I think that will bring about greater spiritual transformation in our world, whatever the means by which people do that. Certainly, this is one of many, many practices.
So your work begins with this 3-day workshop, and Ross mentioned at the beginning that you'll be teaching that workshop coming up this weekend at Bridge and Enrich in Vancouver. And then it progresses, if people are interested, into doing first a 1-year deep dive into becoming a spiritual healer. There's a week of training residentially at Hollyhock, then a virtual curriculum in community, and then another week of training. And then they can go on to an advanced 2-year program, and then they can go on and get trained to be teachers, and then they can go on, of course, on and on. All right, it's a full progressive path. And you introduce different techniques, if you will, of spiritual healing, some of which I think people might not have heard of before and are intriguing. So I wonder if we can talk about that a little bit, just to give people a sense of what is quote unquote spiritual healing and how does a spiritual healer operate. So let's start with the technique of psychopomp. What is it and how can I help people once I've learned it?
Yes, certainly. So the word or term psychopomp is a word that originated in ancient Greece, and it translates to conveyor or conductor of souls. And a psychopomp can be a human or a helping spirit who has that particular area of specialization. And as the translation indicates, a psychopomp helps people preparing for death or at the time of death, sometimes shortly after their death, sometimes even quite some time after their death, to leave this realm. And so to cross over, if you will, and go to the light. And the reason that psychopomps are beneficial is because for those in the dying process, of course, having a guide and knowing that they will be welcomed and received, and that the continuation of their soul and spirit will be cared for by helping spirits, even when there is a physical death that occurs. That's incredibly comforting and can help people feel a great sense of easefulness in approaching or facing their death. Now, conversely, it's very common for there to be a death and for someone to not be able to leave this world easily or successfully. And that can occur for a number of reasons. That can occur as a result of fearfulness. So perhaps someone fearing that they'll be punished for their actions, their sins, if you will. Depending on a person's cosmology, they may believe they're going to be sent to purgatory or hell, or to a realm in which they'll experience perpetual misery because of actions they've taken, harm they've caused, perhaps. But people can also become unable or unwilling to cross over because of their attachments, because of the suddenness of their passing. So, an abrupt death, perhaps in an accident, or a violent death like a murder. So, where someone actually doesn't know that they've died, that can lead them to becoming stuck here or lost here in our realm. And when that happens, someone can stay long after their physical death has occurred. And so I would broadly refer to those beings as suffering beings, because I feel they're in a state of suffering, which can describe not only the mental or emotional state they're in, because they might be distressed, they might be afraid, they might feel lost and confused, but also suffering in the sense that they're not able to continue on their spiritual journey because they're in the wrong place. And so a psychopomp is someone who's learned the skills, which is a part of what the curriculum that I offer includes, to assist those beings, whether they're floating aimlessly because they're lost or confused. Sometimes they're attached to a particular place, like a home or a particular area, a plot of land, for example. they can also become attached to people. So a psychopomp is someone who assists with that crossing over process, even if it happens long after the physical death has occurred. And when that includes a suffering being being attached to a person, the psychopomp process becomes a part of a more complex technique called compassionate depossession. And that's when there's actually a suffering being attached to a person. So that would constitute spiritual possession. But there's a very simple and gentle, effective, and compassionate remedy, which is compassionate depossession, where the person who's now effectively serving as a host and the soul that's become attached to them become decoupled from one another. And then the suffering being or soul is guided to the light using not only the skills that a human trained psychopomp learns in a program like mine, but also in partnership with the helping spirits who specialize in psychopomp work, who are the conductors or conveyors of souls. And of course, we see cross-culturally different examples of those types of beings that are represented in folklore and in art and in stories and mythology and so forth, who come at the time of death in order to carry us onwards from this world.
Now, there's a lot here, and there are a lot of other techniques that you teach people as you teach them to become professional spiritual healers. We're not going to be able to cover it all because we're getting some really good questions, and I want to bring the questions of our participants into the conversation because they're really good. Cameron asks, what's the difference between intuitive knowing and information from a helping spirit? Isn't it just intuitive knowing? What's the difference?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question. I would say that sometimes we can receive messages from the helping spirit that we think are coming from our intuition or that we think are coming from our minds, if you will, but that may actually originate in the spirit world, that may actually come from helping the spirits. And so learning how to contact the helping spirits and forming relationships with them enables us to begin to discern the information that's coming from them and the information that we're accessing ourselves, our own inner knowing, if you will. Sometimes those two things are the same, but sometimes we have the experience of this being who is a separate being, whose perspective is different, whose experience is different, whose knowledge base is different. They're drawing from sources of wisdom that we can hardly even imagine in order to help us, to guide us, and to support us in our lives. But earlier, I was talking about how the helping spirits do have ways of, I would say, penetrating our awareness. And I have found that in partnering with my helping spirits in a conscious way, as I look back on times in my life before I knew how to do that, I definitely received messages from my helping spirits that I thought were coming from me, that were in fact coming from them. And in time, I've learned to be able to discern by the quality of the message, by the contents also, and also by how it's delivered. My practice is one of trying to make myself as available to the helping spirits as possible so that we're in constant communication about important choices that I'm making day by day so that I can receive that guidance continually. And so I'll check in with my helping spirits regularly in order to access that guidance and make those decisions in my day-to-day life.
Anya writes in, have you ever resisted a call from spirit? And if so, what happened?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm going to have to rattle on that for a moment.
Oh, good. Tell people what you're doing. What are you doing now?
Yes. So I'm going to rattle, which will shift my consciousness sufficiently that I can hear my helping spirits because they may be able to remind me of something, of an instance like this.
Right, because you don't want to dance around this one. You want to really tell the truth. So
no, this is an important one.
That's right.
Just a moment. Let me see if I have a good example. Well, this may not be an ideal example actually, because it does have a good ending. And you will remember this, of course, my love, because this has to do with something you and I went through together. So I had received guidance from the Helping Spirits. We were looking for a new home where we previously lived in Boulder, Colorado. And we looked for 3 years, right? If my memory serves. And I had been given some very particular criteria. So the Helping Spirits told me what to look for so that when I found the house or went to see the house, if you will, at an open house or whatever, that I would recognize it. And so lo and behold, but after looking and looking and looking and looking and looking and looking, one of the houses that we looked at had these qualities. And also, the felt sense I had was a sense of recognition. I walked into the house and I said, "This is our house." Well, we ended up not proceeding with buying the house. This is a long story. I'm going to try to tell this in a concise way that's actually useful. We ended up not proceeding with buying the house. And then time went on. And the reason this is maybe not such a great example is because then the opportunity presented itself again. And you might remember, love, that I was walking home from work one day and I went into this coffee shop that I never went to. And the child of the homeowner was in the coffee shop, who was a teenager. And we had met them at the open house. And I asked about the house. And she said, "Oh, well, they took it off the market, but they're putting it back on again." And then when I journeyed to the Helping Spirits, basically the Helping Spirits said, "We told you, we gave you everything that you needed to know, and you walked away, and there is another opportunity." And we did finally put in an offer on that house. Do you remember how much time passed though between when we walked away and when I
No, I don't remember, but I'm glad you're telling the story in this way, not in the way of and I didn't follow the guidance because my wife didn't let me. No, you're telling a very generous version of the story, and it all worked out. So basically, you don't have anything else of when you didn't listen
I
to
can
the
ask again.
guidance
I
you
can ask
received.
again.
Okay, no, it's all right. We're gonna move on.
Okay.
Because that one wasn't all that great. So basically, you are listening. Okay, unless your wife it becomes an obstacle. Okay, we have several people who have written in various versions of how do you know you're a healer? Can
Mm.
you recognize if someone who wants to be a healer, that this would be a good choice for them, or perhaps not for this person? Is this role only suitable for specific people?
That's a fascinating question. So I'm going to take myself out of that equation and say that I feel that in this work, because it's based on our collaborations with the Helping Spirits and their highly engaged, highly active role in the healing process, I'm going to say it's up to the Helping Spirits. And so what I essentially do is facilitate a process of training and inquiry. So, starting with an introductory workshop, which trains you in the practice of journeying, which anybody can do. And that's a standalone offering that's useful for anybody, whether they're interested in considering becoming a spiritual healer or not, even for those simply compelled by the presence of the spirit world who want to know how to contact helping spirits safely and effectively and sustainably. But in the course of even some of those early conversations, one of the things that I find is that the helping spirits are often quite forward, quite forthcoming in helping people who are called to the path of healer recognize some of the signs, some of the indicators, some of the synchronicities. Classically, this is a calling that comes from the spirit world, but it can take a variety of forms. So people might experience something as dramatic as a near death experience. I've never experienced anything as dramatic as that. Some people experience severe illness. Some people experience a dark night of the soul or an experience of profound loss, which can be a spiritual initiation. For some people, it's trauma. Of course, we know there are a variety of forms of trauma, but we don't have a context or framework typically for understanding those experiences in a sacred way. So, what I would say is that the role I have to play, the very tiny role that I have to play, might include offering a framework in which those kinds of experiences help us become aware of the presence of the spirit world and also help us come into contact with the spirit world in ways that create healing or facilitate healing or that bring us tremendous comfort, especially at times of pain or loss, and that those can be precursors or indicators that there's a relationship there that not only benefits you, that you wouldn't only experience as a source of comfort and healing and inspiration for yourself, but then you may feel inspired to offer others by being in the role of healer, helping facilitate that on behalf of others.
So let's say specifically someone wants to bring to their dreams a question or
Mhm.
bring to their waking life a certain kind of question that they'll let the world of phenomenal display answer. What do you think would be a good question in terms of if the being a spiritual healer is a good path for them? How would you frame the question?
I think I would begin by asking about what's already taken place. And so instead of taking the position that I'm now requesting or requiring or demanding a sign phenomenologically, which is wonderful when that happens, and I get curious about what's already happened, what's already transpired. And so I might be interested in holding an inquiry about looking back upon events that have occurred even as early as since your childhood that might be little breadcrumbs that might lead you to an understanding at this time in adulthood, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s, I would say, even later in some cases, that there has actually been this thread. And that thread might include the occasional visitation. That thread might include a visitation paired with a loss or an accident or a different type of trauma. That thread might include being someone who often wants to tend to others. That might be animals, that might be people, it might be classmates, it might be colleagues. It might be a thread that shows itself by your deep love of nature and the aliveness you experience in nature, because, of course, in this work, we're not just talking about the presence of helping spirits who don't have physical bodies like we do. We're also talking about spirit enlivening all of creation and that beautiful intelligence, that beautiful consciousness enlivening everything and making everything luminous. And so that thread for you might be having experiences in nature of feeling like you're contacting a field of light when you're in a forest. And so I would hold an inquiry about being able to look upon things that have already occurred through a sacred lens or in a sacred way, to start to be able to connect those dots and to see if there is that through line, because there's probably a lot of information from your past, let alone what may yet become revealed. There's probably a great deal that's already been revealed that maybe was misunderstood or maybe dismissed or overlooked, because we do very often have a tendency to set those things aside and maybe focus on more concrete things like being conventional or wanting a stable job. I mean, obviously those are important things too. Our sense of security and safety matters a great deal, but part of what I'm holding is we can have a career, a very profoundly fulfilling, meaningful, and impactful career as spiritual healers, just like we can have careers as massage therapists and as doctors and as acupuncturists and as therapists and so forth.
Omar writes in, two-part question. We'll start with the second part. Is it possible to be a healer if I still feel broken myself?
Oh, I think so. I think it has to be possible. Otherwise, how would any of us ever become healers? Perhaps the distinction lies in us making a commitment to our healing as healers, because it's so important that we ourselves are coming from a place of integrity. That doesn't mean we're fully healed ourselves. I would certainly never claim that to be true in my case, although I will say I'm committed to my own healing. And having said that, for me, the path of training that I offer, that's an important part of what Omar is inquiring about, is understanding the effectiveness of the healing modality one chooses to embrace or cultivate as a healer. So in my training program, which takes 3 years to complete, but it's divided into a year-long program and a 2-year program. Within the year-long program, for example, we never work outside of the circle. The entire curriculum unfolds within the chalice of the circle, so within the safety of the container. So it's a learning laboratory. So everyone is in the role of client and practitioner interchangeably, equally, and evenly throughout the course of the program. And the reason for that is, of course, you need to learn from your own direct experience. As a practitioner, you need to practice the techniques and make sure that you gain skillfulness and facility with those techniques. But it's also essential that you feel convinced of their effectiveness. So you getting to be in the role of the client means you get to receive and you get to see what changes you experience. And that also engenders, I feel, among my students, I think they already have a commitment to their own personal healing, but I think it engenders an even deeper commitment to that. And also a way to cultivate that ongoingly, because you're now a part of a cohort of maybe 30 or 40 other people that you can trade with anytime. And so you're also now a part of a collegiate community that's been built upon you exchanging sessions with one another. So you can always reach out to one another and use one another as a resource to support your ongoing healing as practitioners seeking to continue committing to that so that they can be healers who are in integrity with themselves and with their clients.
And then the other part of Omar's question, how do I avoid ego inflation as I begin to step into the role of being a spiritual healer?
Well, I think this work takes care of that by itself. There are checks and balances built into the system already because the diagnosis comes from the helping spirits. Often the remedy comes directly from them or is facilitated by us, but the information isn't coming from us. So it's a very different model of healing. It's not up to the practitioner to provide the diagnosis and also the remedy in the sense of knowing what to do. We need to know how to, if you will, carry out or execute what we're told by the helping spirits, which is why a training program is important. But it's up to the helping spirits to tell us what's needed, when, how, and in what order. So we leave so much to the helping spirits. And that means we have to learn how to get out of the way. We're not expressing our opinions. If we're journeying for a client and seeking guidance on their behalf, it's not about us expressing our opinions to them. It's not about us telling a client what we think they should do. It's about us consulting, if you will, a higher power. And similarly, when it comes to healing, we're not the ones determining what's wrong or out of balance and what's needed. It's all up to the helping spirits. And so there's a natural way in which what we cultivate isn't aggrandizement in terms of our role as practitioners. It's not an egoic state that you can maintain in relationship with the helping spirits. It's a partnership. And so, yes, we have a role to play that we want to carry out with humility and integrity and dignity. And the helping spirits have a very important role to play as well. But the healing comes from them. So that very premise, which is different from, let's say, the Western medical model, is its own sort of organic form of there being checks and balances in the system. And I would say also the work is always evidence-based. And therein lies the value in a training program of working with colleagues who will tell you honestly and truthfully, because they must. It doesn't serve you or them for this not to be disclosed. We're asking for feedback. We're asking our clients to say, was that helpful? Was that useful? Was it effective? Did you notice a change? That doesn't mean that there's an immediate dramatic or drastic change that the client notices straight away in every situation. Sometimes it's more gradual or subtle. But being able to stay in dialogue helps us increase our confidence in the work. But again, we want to increase competency. We don't want to become egoic about it. And so I think there is an organic way in which that is softened by the premise of the work, the partnership, and our reliance upon the helping spirits to do their part when it comes to the healing.
Now, you said something I thought was provocative of, here I am, I want to train people to become spiritual healers, professionals, like other professions. And I think you referenced massage practitioners, or we could say psychotherapists, counselors, coaches, acupuncturists, all various forms of healing arts. Being a spiritual healer, in your view, could be a profession. Could be, is. For some people is, you want to see, you have a vision of it being a professionally respected field. And I wonder if you can talk more about that, because the reason I'm bringing this up, and I said it's provocative, is I think a lot of people are like, really?
Yes. Well, I certainly understand why there may be some doubtfulness about that, and that could be a lack of experience. It's possible that someone may question that who doesn't live in a community where there is a spiritual healer or has never even heard of spiritual healers before. And so, of course, let's allow for that possibility. But yes, absolutely, this is a viable profession, just as the other healing modalities are within, if you will, the broad spectrum of the healing arts. I feel that spiritual healing has classically held a credible and respected place alongside other healing modalities. That has not been true, I would say, in recent times. And so, part of my mission in life, if you will, part of my vision is to help restore spiritual healing to what I feel is its rightful place. And I feel that it has a rightful place alongside Western medicine, Eastern medicine, psychiatry and psychotherapy, energy medicine, alongside various hands on body work, if you will, healing modalities, etc. And I understand that it's not as widely accepted yet. It's not as widely understood either. And so, certainly, my hope is that through my efforts and the efforts of many colleagues in this broader community, that the work will become more ordinary. I would love it if it was just as normal for somebody to go to the dentist every 6 months for a dental cleaning as to go to a spiritual healer for a checkup. Because to me, I feel like the house cleaning metaphor, I think, works well here, that you don't clean your house once and then never have to clean it again. You don't have your teeth cleaned once and never have to go back to the dentist again. I think our well being and the tending of our well being on every level is continuous. And all I'm saying is that the dimension of our spiritual well being is not as consistently or commonly tended. So it's not included as part of a usual or a typical approach to wellness or well being. But I think it belongs there. And I think it belongs there alongside the modalities that tend to our physical well being, our emotional, mental, and psychological well being in a variety of ways. To me, our spiritual well being is just as an important, or just as important, I should say, an aspect of our well being as those other aspects of our well being. And furthermore, I would offer that sometimes issues that we think of as originating on a physical level, or issues that we think of as being psychological in origin or in nature, may actually originate on a soul or spiritual level. So we may not be treating the condition using the medicine that's going to actually provide the remedy. And so sometimes we just need to look through a different lens. So ideally, when it comes to our well being, we would look through multiple lenses concurrently. And my hope is that in the fullness of time, the clinics that now might include a functional medicine practitioner and an acupuncturist and Chinese medicine practitioner will also include a spiritual healer and other modalities as well. In other words, my hope is that integrated clinics or clinics that support integrative approaches to healing will include spiritual healers. And I hope those will be some of the people who complete my program in the years to come or who have already.
Well, I have to say, you're very well suited to be carrying this particular torch, for this to be your mission. You're so articulate and professional in your presentation of something that is so outside most people's rational acceptance, and you do a terrific job carrying this purpose, carrying this mission really beautifully. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question that's come in, and then one more final question from me, and we'll close this down. The question that has come in, I think, is quite a good question from Hannah, who writes, why does profound loss and trauma connect people more to the spiritual world? Or can it connect people? Why does it at times connect people, often connects people more to the spiritual world? What changes?
Yes. Well, I don't think it's just one thing that changes, but I think there can be different things that change. And so I'll talk about loss specifically. I was recently talking with someone about this very phenomenon, someone who had had a very tragic, beloved, loved one pass away suddenly in a terrible accident, who described their experience as being one where the veils thinned. So, where they felt that they became aware of the presence of other dimensions of reality, including the presence of spiritual beings that they hadn't been aware of previously. And in time, they found that the veils didn't close right away. That thinness, if you will, that transparency that they experienced between the physical world and the non-physical world endured. That was a sustained state. And they described specifically, it's interesting that this came up earlier in our conversation, they described specifically walking in nature and feeling the ripples of light and the aliveness in everything in a way that they had never experienced before. So I would describe that as initiatory. And I love the definition initiation that I received from one of my living teachers, Betsy Bergstrom, which is that through initiation or by way of initiation, we become aware of an aspect of reality that either we didn't know existed before or that we had not experienced directly before. And so that was an example of someone becoming initiated into the existence of or the experience of realms beyond this one, and a sense of interpenetrability between the two that remained. And so they were able to experience multidimensional reality ongoingly. So that's one example. And then with trauma, of course, there are different types of trauma, which can include a traumatic loss like the one that I described. I have found that trauma can be one of the ways that we become initiated into the existence of the spirit world in a few ways. So, one pathway is when the spirit world becomes a place of safety, when the spirit world becomes a refuge, because the nature of the trauma is such that we no longer feel that we're safe in the hands of humans. We're not protected by those who should have protected us, pardon me. Perhaps, of course, they may not have known how to. They may not have realized that we were coming to harm or that we were at risk in some way. Oftentimes, there are traumas occurring that are hidden from view, hidden in plain sight in some situations. And so, for a victim of a traumatic event or an abusive pattern, for example, the presence of the spirit world becomes a sanctuary. And so the trauma can actually open our access to the spirit world. And what can happen is that we turn our attention away from the human world and turn it towards the spirit world as a means for survival and also as a means for escaping or avoiding what's actually occurring here. So, in order to endure experiences that we're suffering that are unendurable or that are unimaginable. So, in order to survive those experiences, our attention can turn to the spirit world. Well, of course, that can provide, again, a refuge, a sense of safety, but it can also provide access to beings who can help us with our healing, who can help guide us, perhaps in ways that will enable us to leave the situation in which we're experiencing harm, or find our way out of that, or find our way towards safety and meaning and purposefulness in our lives, which then might inspire us to want to offer that to others, to make those resources available to others by choosing to become a spiritual healer.
Final question, love. I haven't really even had a chance to talk to you that much about this, but one of the things recently over the past couple weeks that I've really been exploring is longing,
Hmm.
various kinds of longing, and spiritual longing specifically, and really being with it and seeing where it takes me. And I wanted to end on this note because for whatever reason, I'm sensing that there may be people who have listened to this conversation and some longing is kicked up in them. Maybe it's a longing for a deeper sense of partnering with compassionate spirits. Maybe it's some kind of professional longing that has to do with working as a healer in some capacity. I'm not quite sure. But what do you suggest as a way for people to relate to whatever their own longing might be?
Yes. Well, I notice as you say that, I immediately think about an example of someone, let's say, who's truly called to the path of the psychopomp, whose gift lies in being a death doula, let's say, being present at the time of someone's death and tending to their soul's crossing in addition to tending to them physically at the time of death. And yet, perhaps that person is in a medical environment, in an institutional environment, where the spiritual dimension of that work isn't understood or isn't practiced or isn't embraced. And I would say there's a building block. What you've achieved can be built further upon. So many times, people who have a longing to become spiritual healers are starting from scratch. They might do something completely unrelated and then forge an entirely new path. But oftentimes, people are getting warmer and warmer in their careers and in their lives and in their unfolding. And it's just a matter of this next step in their development and their maturation, in their training, to include the spiritual dimension of what they're already doing, because everything has a spiritual dimension. And so, very often, people don't actually abandon the career they've built, but rather enhance that or enrich that or expand upon that or widen the scope of their offerings. So the longing to deepen is often what I hear from people who already have careers in helping professions and who may want to begin including this dimension of the work. And of course, for some people, it's a completely different path. It's a total left turn. And there may be an even deeper sense of longing if more changes are needed, if more drastic changes are needed. But whether or not someone's called to the path of healer, everyone has helping spirits. And I think we all long for an experience of interconnectedness. We long to be held with love and acceptance, unconditional love and acceptance. We long to feel our interdependency. And so I would say that this path is available to anyone. And of course, yes, if you're called to become a healer, this is the path for you. If the nature of the healing you want to offer does have that spiritual dimension. But anyone can learn how to journey, and anyone can form a relationship with benevolent helping spirits who can offer care and companionship and support and guidance and help create for you a life of greater purposefulness, a life of greater meaning, a life of greater alignment. Because whether you're called to the path of healer or not, part of the longing that we so often feel is to live in accord with our sense of purpose. I would say our soul's purpose in being here, and clarity about the nature of what that is and how to live in alignment with that, how to abide by that, comes from the helping spirits. And so I welcome anyone who's interested in learning how to form a relationship with the helping spirits to consider one of the 3-day introductory workshops that I offer as a way to be in community, to learn together, to have these beautiful, sometimes profoundly life-altering experiences together, and also to have people to talk to about the spirit world. So often the longing is to be able to speak openly about our curiosity about the spirit world, about the experiences we've already had, about what we would like to be experiencing, how we want to deepen our relationships with the spirit world. One of the reasons I'm so excited about offering introductory workshops is because you have an instant circle of 20 or 30 people that all speak the same language, where it can be totally normalized and ordinary to talk about the spirit world. And that can meet and fulfill so much of the longing that we each have.
Julie M. Kramer. We're going to have to shut this party down now. I want to thank all of our friends for being with us and Banyan Books for hosting this conversation. Again, those of you who are in the Vancouver area, Julie's going to be teaching at Bridge and Enrich this Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you can use this code that's being distributed, Banyan 2025, and receive a $200 discount to the 3-day workshop this weekend, or use that code for a virtual 3-day workshop that's taking place August 8th, 9th, and 10th. And, God, I learn new things about you every time we talk. I love these interviews. I love these conversations. Thanks, love. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Follow your longing wherever it takes you. It's the thread. It's leading us forward. Thanks, Banyan friends.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.